There are some of the Republican candidates who have come out and who have criticized Donald Trump. You mentioned Asa Hutchinson. He told me in the interview that I did with him today that he believes Donald Trump needs to be accountable for, as he told me, quote, sending everybody to the Capitol. Of course, referencing his supporters. Hutchinson told me he believes Trump needs to be held accountable and that he doesn't believe Trump has been held accountable to an adequate standard at this point in time. You also mentioned Chris Christie. The common denominator, though, in this part of the story is that all of these candidates who have come out and who have criticized Donald Trump, there's also a former Republican Congressman Will Hurd as an example, they have all been polling at less than 2% in most cases. The 2% example is the former New Jersey governor, Chris Christie, who very much many people feel represents more of the 2012 base of the Republican Party as a side to the present day 2023 base of the Republican Party. I've connected with people from several of the campaigns. I was speaking earlier today with people from the Never Back Down PAC. That's the super PAC that has endorsed Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. I was speaking to several of the candidates themselves. The Trump campaign, though, seems to be the most reluctant to come out and actually admit that this could potentially hurt them in a negative sense, because everyone is quick to point out that the fundraising numbers, the polling numbers, that they are looking more and more positive for Donald Trump the more this goes on. But there's a lot of people who just aren't buying the polls and who aren't buying those fundraising numbers. I think I told you this last time. There's someone I know quite well, Brian Karem, who works at the White House. He writes a column very regularly. He tells me on, almost a weekly basis whenever we talk that he believes that there's no way that this is actually going to help Donald Trump in a positive way. And I mean, that would be logical to assume anytime someone does things, whether it's the Jean Carroll situation, whether it's the hush money situation. I mean, these are serious things that in most normal circumstances would have negative consequences. But it would appear the Trump campaign repeatedly makes it out as if Donald Trump is in some way the victim of this situation. And as a result of that, gets more and more money in terms of fundraising from his existing supporters. And in some cases, has supporters from the other campaigns think that they need to get behind him because he is the presumptive front runner in the GOP campaign for the presidency. So certainly, I mean, we will see, but as of right now, it doesn't appear at least as if any of the other candidates will be backing away from him at any time. You mentioned possible prison time for him. That's obviously a very big if, whether or not he would receive a sentence. And obviously, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves at this point in time. There are a couple of people that were talking all throughout the day that, the person who would ultimately decide how long a sentence could be for former President Trump has been known to give harsh sentences to some of the January 6th rioters, which many people, I mean, there's people who you talk to who denied this, but it is partially the truth, according to many, that Donald Trump's rhetoric surrounding the 2020 election is what led to the January 6th insurrection. That's obviously denied by his campaign and by people that I talk with. I mentioned Larry Elder, who I talked with earlier. It's denied by people like him, but that is certainly something that is true to many people. Again, that Donald Trump could have potentially helped incite the January 6th riot based off of some of the claims he was making in regards to the 2020 campaign.
One Republican nominee who did say something pretty significant, Mike Pence, which was, quote, today's indictment serves as an important reminder anyone who puts himself over the Constitution should never be president of the United States. For someone who was obviously a longtime Trump ally right up until January 6th, that's a pretty strong statement here. Is Mike Pence, just quickly, any chance of kind of Republican nomination? How is he going? And is this, because this seems like it is the strongest he has come out in terms of language regarding Trump and January 6th?
Yeah. So Mike Pence's former chief of staff, Mark Short, who now serves as a senior advisor on the Pence campaign, gave several interviews over the course of today. And one of the interviews that he gave, he mentioned that even on January 6th, after that very dramatic story that the Pence campaign and that Mike Pence himself has previously told on January 6th, where he went to the loading dock of the Capitol to hide and to protect himself from these January 6th rioters who were, in essence, looking for him. Mark Short said even after that day, when Donald Trump beforehand and throughout the day was telling his supporters that Mike Pence had some sort of an authority to send these votes back to the states, as Donald Trump described it, something he had no power to do. But even after that, Mark Short said in a couple of interviews today that he went back to his office at the White House despite many reports that his credentials had been taken away. So that perhaps says a little bit, to me at least, about the relationship between Pence and Trump, at least before this campaign got started, perhaps not being as bad as it is being demonstrated in the public eye. But in terms of whether or not Mike Pence has a chance of winning the presidency, certainly there are a lot of pundits who are jumping to conclusions about when he could drop out of the race. That was the conversation on CNN, on the cable news network today. And so, the chances that he could be successful, there was one poll even that showed many people ahead of him. There was one poll that showed Nikki Haley ahead of him and Vivek Ramaswamy ahead of him, two people who have less experience than him, when usually a former vice president, I mean, you saw Joe Biden, he was the former vice president, is pretty often the one who can surge to the nomination, but not looking like that will be the case with Mike Pence.